All right, Tess. So here we go. We're going to dive into some of the chemistry now. So we are going to be having students write Python code that uses an API. So APIs are amazing. This is super exciting. API stands for Application Program Interface. Basically, you use an API whenever you have two programs or two pieces of software talk to each other. So here's a simple example that you'll probably see if you Google what is an API. So on your phone, you probably have an app that tells you the weather. But where does that information come from? Well, it comes from the National Weather Service, which gets its information from lots of satellites all over the place. And your phone is not accessing those satellites directly, right? Instead, the National Weather Service has built an API that your phone can use that basically acts as a go-between between the weather app on your phone and kind of the raw weather data from the satellites. Okay, so an API is like a go-between between a program you're writing or a program you're using and some kind of external database or some kind of source of information. So this is relevant to us because we're going to be using an API that lets us fetch lots of information about the periodic table. And what I've done here is just pulled up the documentation for the API. So as APIs go, this one is actually fairly simple with very readable documentation. Gives you an overview of all the information you can find from this database. And most important for us is it gives us what's called an API endpoint, which is basically the URL that we need to tell our Python code to access in order to fetch data about the periodic table, okay? So I'm going to go back here to my Python code. I've set up a new project in REPL. I have some import statements at the top, which are just going to allow us to do what we want to do. And that involves using some libraries of Python code that have already been written. We don't have to worry about, we don't have to understand them. We just have to import them into our code. So that's what we're going to do. And then I have kind of this mysterious line of code here. All this is going to do is format our dictionaries nicely when we print them out, just to make things a little bit more readable. Okay, so let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's go ahead and fetch all of the periodic table elements from this API. So we're going to store what the API sends back to us in a variable called response. And the way we access this is we call request.get. And then inside of there, we are going to put that API endpoint from this documentation website. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. I have it in another screen just to make it easy. Paste it in. Okay. So when this gets returned to us and stored in response, it's actually in a format that's not readable by our program. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called, let's say, all elements. And all elements is going to take that response, which we got from the API, and turn it into something called JSON, which stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Super fancy, don't need to understand it. All it does is turn that information into a format that's readable by our program and thus by us, okay? And then we are just going to print out all elements. So instead of just using a print statement, I want to take advantage of that pretty print, which is going to format this nicely for us. So it's going to look slightly differently. So pp.pprint, and then we're going to print out, what is it, all elements. Okay, so that was a lot of startup, but let's see what happens when we run our code. It's going to take a little minute because we're importing all of these packages, which behind the scenes could be like thousands of lines of code. So it's going to take a minute to process those. And we get an error, no module named pp. Did I screw that up? Oh, the module is called pprint. Let's try that. And there we go. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So maybe I can expand that a little bit, our output. Oops. And you'll see we've just got lots of elements from the periodic table. So let's see if we can take a peek here. So here in between curly braces, so remember each of these is a dictionary, just like one of our students in our last video. All right, so I've highlighted there one element's information, which is in between those curly braces. And what information do we see in this dictionary? We see the atomic mass, atomic number, atomic radius, block, boiling point. So it looks like all of these pieces of information are listed in alphabetical order, which explains why name is all the way down here, platinum. So maybe that would have been useful to know at the beginning. So this gives us all the information about platinum, okay? And let's see if we scroll to another element here. This one is mercury, okay? So here we have our 118 elements, although of course, just like before, we don't see all the output because our console is not unlimited. So this is actually the first one that we see. Okay, so this is lots of information. This is information about every element. If you go back to the documentation, you see that there are ways of changing your GET request so that you're only fetching certain elements. So for instance, if we want to fetch elements having a specific state, then we're just going to add this descriptor of /state/ either gas, liquid, solid, whatever you want. So let's do that. So elements /state/ gas. We'll take that response, convert it into something readable, store it in all elements, and print it out. Let's see what that looks like. So now you see we've got only these elements that are whose standard state is a gas. So I guess let's see if we can. It's a little hard to read here because I've got so many tabs open, but you can make it bigger on your computer. So let's see. Xenon apparently is one of our gaseous elements. And we see all the information about xenon. Radon is another one. And so you see, we've actually filtered this so that we only see the elements that are gases. So you can go through the documentation for the API, which I encourage you to do, and kind of play with all these different API endpoints to see how you can use them to easily filter through all of the information in the periodic table, okay? In the next video, we'll go through some ways that we might want to have students create custom filters using their own Python code that they write. But I think first, it's important to just play around with what can you get directly from the API, because you can actually get information in a lot of different ways. So I will leave it at that for now. Have fun.